Hi, I'm Zendor, and yes, you have been expecting me. I'll be your guide, playing the devil's advocate as we peer into the depths of what keeps us afraid, angry, ignorant, and immobile. Dreams mold future realities, and our dream for Who is to inspire our viewers to become actively involved in the critical issues that affect all of us.
You know, getting into drugs and being high is a real stupid thing to do. Being original, say no to peer pressure. Say no may be the smartest thing you ever do.
You got a right to say no. You got a right to say no. No, right to say no.
Who? Hi, I'm Zendor, and today's show will be covering some subject areas regarding the Middle East. With us in the studio here is Dr. Eilleen Borris, who's founder and director of Peace Initiatives, which was established for nonviolent conflict resolution in the Middle East, and Joe Abodeely, a local attorney who's a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve and has written several papers regarding the Middle East and the issues there. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, Eilleen, I'm going to start with you. Regarding the Middle East, what really has been happening over there? Can you synopsize in a brief historical representation so that we as Americans get a better idea?
Well, I'm going to really give you a real capsulated form, but I think if you can look at it starting from almost a biblical time, starting with Abraham and his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. And they are the roots of Judaism and Islam. So right from the very beginning, here is a relationship through a tribe. Now, through 4,000 years of diaspora, the Jews have...
Would you explain that?
Diaspora of being dispersed. Diaspora means dispersal.
Okay.
Leaving a land, wandering in the desert, diaspora, being in a place that's not your home. We have the wandering Jew, who's wandered and wandered and wandered and has never found a place of home. Now, this has continued through to the 19th century, where as the history they were victims, conquered, oppressed, a whole cycle had been set up. And
so
that's,
these wandering Jews are no beautiful plant then?
That's right, that's right at this point, but have gone through a lot of trauma as a result, which has left a real trauma on the psyche, and which is really the impetus for the Zionist movement, which began at the late 1890s. And at this point, what was decided through Theodor Herzl was, you know, here are Jews who need to feel secure, need to have a home because of all the pogroms and so forth, and the oppression. And so the whole statement of people without a land without people. But the bottom line is that the land that they were talking about, which is present-day Israel, did have people, the indigenous people living on the land, the Palestinians.
It's had people for
thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
Thousands of years. And although the Jews have historical claim and biblical claim, there are people living there who also had historical claim and biblical claim. But the reason of the formation of Israel, which is really important, was to give the Jews a homeland, a place of security, so they wouldn't be conquered anymore. They wouldn't go through oppression. They had lost so much through pogroms, and the rest of the world were not coming to their aid. And the epitome of that, of course, was the Holocaust. You had this incredible death machinery in which the world either didn't believe it or couldn't step in to do very much about it.
Now, we've done a lot to help Israel. Just recently, we authored a $10 million or $10 billion loan to Israel. Joe, why?
Well, first of all, it's a loan guarantee. It's not actually a loan, but the bottom line is if, in fact, Israel defaults on it, we're liable.
How the heck can we do that with a how many $1 trillion deficit?
Well, I think the reason why we've done it, Zendor, is because, for political reasons. Israel has ostensibly been an ally to us in the Middle East and purportedly was going to be our agent or savior in case we needed him if any conflict arose in the Middle East. However, Desert Storm has shown that when we did have that conflict, Israel became a liability as opposed to an asset. But let me make one first point here for your viewers. First of all, I want to commend you for even having this show right now, because the people who are watching us right now, I hope they don't think this is just a show about religion or something like that. We're talking about the Middle East, and the Middle East is extremely important to Americans. To Americans, not to just American Jews or American Arabs or Jews in Israel or Arabs in the Arab countries, but to Americans, because the Middle East has been a hotbed for millennia, for thousands of years. It is now and probably shall be in the future. And
we really don't know the historical representation of it because during, like, the Dark Ages,
right,
that's a European perspective, and much of our historical information here, even in regards to our own indigenous peoples,
it's from a European perspective.
And
exactly.
also the whole history, the historical development of Israel. As I mentioned earlier, there were people living on a land. There were Palestinians living on the land.
The Canaanites.
And yes, and it was taken over. You know, you've got the Babylonians, you've got the Hebrews, you've got the Israelites, you've got so many people coming in. And when we look at what happened around the turn of the century, 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, what was going on prior to that were some other kinds of historical perspectives that we don't hear from about the Arab perspective. And what was going on with that was that the Arabs were living there, and the British and the French went to them and said, hey, listen, you've got the Ottoman Empire here. You know, this is World War I.
Right.
And if you can ward off the Turks, we will give you what was considered the Fertile Crescent, which is very important considering that most of the land there is very arid, the Fertile Crescent being very fertile. And in fact, they never got that promise. What they got instead was the Balfour Declaration, which divided the state. And what was even more interesting about that, and more devastating actually, was the psychological aspect that these people living there are invisible. And that was their stream. Where the Jews are being persecuted and oppressed, we've got a group of people that were invisible.
Non-entities.
Non-entities.
And the Arabs felt cheated. And of course, after, as Dr. Borris, as Eilleen mentioned earlier, after the Holocaust, there was a social consciousness in America about how horribly Jews were treated by the Nazis, and this, of course, helped with the promotion of the creation of Israel. But then again, you have to also look through the history at that time too. Remember, European countries were dominating the Middle East. You had France, you had England. And I guess even the Germans and Italians, I guess, made their appearances coming
in the European culture
to
some degree.
And the English,
French
the
and
British
English
cutting up the land.
Cut up the land, and the problem is with the Zionist movement, which Eilleen touched on, came forth the Israeli state, and that's fine. There's now an Israeli state, but they just happen to put it on a place where Palestinians, who were the Philistia or the Philistines, lived for centuries before. And so how do you resolve that? And then you've had this complex up to present time.
Speaking of present time, regarding Operation Desert Storm, okay, and then the Gulf War, there was a division in between a pact involving the Arab nations and the staying out of the picture, if you will, of Israel. What was happening there?
Well,
do we even know, as an American public, that that indeed was happening?
Well, I don't know if it was a formal pact, or I don't know how it was conveyed, and and I may never know, and you may never know, and Eilleen may never know, and the American people may never know. But suffice it to say, Israel, who has received billions of dollars each year from us, the figure varies from, I've heard it as 4, some people say it's 3, but we know it's a lot. Each year given to Israel, for whatever reason, whether it's economic aid or foreign aid for other purposes or military aid, for whatever reason, they get the money. The problem is Israel was supposed to be our agent whenever we had a problem there in the Middle East. Israel could not be our agent to help us in this war, whether they wanted to or not, because even though people forget that we went to war in Desert Storm because Arab countries asked us to go there. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Right. People also forget that we were able to prosecute that war because Arab countries allowed us to do that. Syria, very powerful and influential in the area. Jordan, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, all the other Arab countries that were part of the coalition allowed us to do that. The bottom line is this. The bottom line is this. What has happened is Israel was not able to be the ally that we wanted it to be, because if they would have come into the war, the coalition, the fragile coalition, would have broken up, and even those Arabs who didn't like Saddam Hussein at the time would have probably turned on us and maybe supported him.
We'll get into that just a little bit more, and I thank you both, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Here in this land of plenty, thousands of Arizonans are hungry. Many don't know they're eligible for food stamps. Most are family people going through some temporary troubles. They've lost a job, home, or a spouse. Food stamps can help. You don't have to be on public assistance. You can have a job and still qualify. Now, one phone call can get you information to tell you if you qualify for food stamps and how to get them. Arizona has made a place at our table of plenty for you. We want to make sure you get there. Call 1-800-352-8401. Food stamps. Meal times don't have to be tough times.
Hi, I'm Dr. Terry Friedman, and you can join me in Freedom Through Health every Thursday evening from 6:30 to 7 p.m. Let me give you a hint of other intriguing new shows at this time during the week. Monday, there's Zender, the Devil's Advocate, who will delight and excite you as he searches the truth on critical issues with raw energy and insight. Tuesday, Joe Abodeely. He's a celebrated KFYI talk show host. He will stimulate you with current events and controversial interviews with professionals in art, politics, law, business, and more. Wednesday, there's Judy Bailey. She's an outspoken herald of our youth and well-known community activist who will help empower you to take a solution-oriented action in your lives. Friday, whose mystery guest will run down the local events and happenings for your convenience in planning your entertainment schedule. Now join us, 6:30 to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday, Channel 25. See you there.
Welcome back. We're with Dr. Eilleen Borris and Joe Abodeely, and we're touching on some very sensitive subject areas internally and externally in our world today. With the Middle East,
Easy for you to say.
Right. Eilleen, what's the basic issues involved from personal perspectives? You've done a lot of study. You've taken groups over there. You've worked in Washington. You've gone to Israel with open dialogue groups. What do you find as the most critical issues involved that need to be resolved in order for things to evolve there?
When people think of Israel and the Palestinian conflict, right away people think about land, and we've been talking about land in the historical context. But I think that that issue needs to be separated out with another issue, which is identity. And in a sense, we've been talking about identity as well when we talk about the Jews living in diaspora.
Now, you're talking about identity with the land or identity of an internal perspective?
Of people.
Okay.
That in fact, there are people who are called Israelis, who are called Jews, and there are people called Palestinians. the Jewish identity is really based on survival. The Palestinian identity is based on recognition. You know, as I mentioned earlier, here comes a group of people to a land assuming that there weren't other people there, but there were. They became invisible, and the world treated Palestinians as invisible. And the Intifada, one of the strengths of the Intifada was to say to the world, here we are. We do not want to be under occupation. We are people in our own right with our own nationality, and we care as to what happens.
Now, the Intifada, explain that.
The Intifada means uprising, and it began in December of 1987, and it was the Palestinian way of really protesting a nonviolent protest. It started out as throwing stones. Now, to us, throwing stones can sound very violent, and to an Israeli soldier, in fact, it does instill fear.
Especially when you get hit by them.
Especially, you know, and you're walking around and you don't know what's going to happen. If you understand from the Palestinian perspective, throwing stones is really a rite of purification. And people don't know that or understand that. So when they're throwing the stones, they're ridding themselves of something that needs to be rid of to purify themselves. And it's a very symbolic thing, as well as stating, this is what's going on here, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. So there are many different levels to what goes on with the Intifada. And with the Intifada, there were other things besides the stone throwing. That's what we see in the media. As part of the Intifada, the Palestinians had made a decision to close their shops by 1 o'clock. This is because they were being taxed, and that was their way of demonstrating that they weren't going to pay taxes.
Kind of a peaceful demonstration.
Exactly, exactly.
Now, speaking of peaceful demonstrations, Joe, you were talking with me earlier about a gentleman that is afraid to go back home.
Actually, I think Eilleen was talking about that.
That's correct.
But the point is, he's afraid to go back home. He happens to be an Israeli. He happens to be a Jew. He lives here in America, but he wants to go back to Israel, but he's afraid to go back to Israel, not because of the Arabs or the Syrians who happen to occupy the Golan Heights, which is where he's from, but because he's afraid he's going to be deported by Israel. He doesn't. Things are unpredictable. He doesn't know what's going on, and he doesn't know, what would happen if he returned home. I think Eilleen has more of the story on that, but I wanted to make a point about where we are now today, because there's something we talk about all this land and identity and who should be on the land, whether it should be the Palestinians or the Israelis or both. Remember, the Israelis is a new term to be distinguished from the ancient Israelites, to be distinguished from the ancient Canaanites, to be distinguished from ancient Philistines.
Now you're going to really confuse everybody.
Keep that point in mind.
Okay. But that's important. That's important because that was one of the big claims that the present Israelis have for saying this land is mine. The Bible says it's mine. Well, the Bible doesn't quite really say it's theirs. You see, that's really a misrepresentation. Or let me rephrase that. It's a gross over-exaggeration. Okay, it's a really stretched interpretation. But what I'm concerned with, and everything I'm saying about the Middle East, and everything I've ever said about the Middle East, and I'm on record as having criticized some of the American Jews for the way they've looked at the Middle East, because I think they've been wrong in their myopic view of it. But I want to give some credit to the Israeli Jews who have just voted Yitzhak Shamir out and brought in Yitzhak Rabin in, who I think is going to be more moderate. But now we see the trading of the land for peace, which is what we didn't want to do when Saddam Hussein said, all right, let's trade the land for peace, and I'll pull out of Kuwait, and would have avoided the whole Gulf War. So isn't it interesting? I guess timing is everything, and it shows how hypocritical even we can be. And why is that? Is it because of the influence of
the United States hypocritical?
Probably. Bite my tongue, lost my head. I'm interested in the interest of the United States, not in the interest of the Arabs or the interest of the Jews. I care about what's good for the United States, and we need to understand what's going on in the Middle East for the good of the United States.
There's also another factor here as to what was going on in Israel at the time. And this past year I've spent a lot of time in Israel and talked to a lot of Israelis who really want to see this conflict resolved. And they kind of got lost in the shuffle. The Israeli political scheme with all their different political parties is very complex to us. There's, I don't know, 24 parties. I'm not quite sure. I lose track. Every time there's a new party that comes in, a new party that's out. And so their whole democracy is based on...
Sounds like a party to me.
It's one big party, you know, depending on how you want to look at it. And so there are a lot of people who wanted to gain voice and finally were able to through these elections. And I, who have lived in East Jerusalem, have seen a lot of things go on. And I love the country. I love the nation of Israel. I love how it developed and the courage. And I'm also very heartbroken at two groups of people who are trying to create some peace. One group is not allowing another group's rights to be respected.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more right after these messages.
If they did this to your home, you'd stop them, wouldn't you?
Hello, I'm Bill Mahoney, a former United States ambassador in the Kennedy administration. Just feeding the homeless is not enough. We need to help the homeless feed themselves. At New Day, they provide not only food, but transitional housing, health care, technical training, emotional support, education for children up through the 8th grade, and support services for up to 2 years. Do more than just feed the homeless. Give them a new start in life by calling 244-1574.
Let's pretend there are only two kinds of people. The ones who need help and those who give help. The ones who need help aren't pretending.
United we stand, divided we fall. And if our backs should ever be against the wall, we'll be together, together, you and I.
Welcome back. Now, let's talk about some potential solutions. Eileen, part of what you do is with peace initiatives. I mean, that's really encompassing your entire life, but there's many segments to that. First of all, let's look at the open dialogue. What is that creating in the way of communication from one person to another that goes beyond cultural and identity barriers?
The open dialogue is work I've been doing here in Phoenix as well as in Israel. And the whole purpose of the open dialogue is to set a structure in which people feel really safe to express their true feelings and their true thoughts in an environment that allows that. And so what we've been doing is getting it to be a very multicultural experience. Arabs, Palestinians, Jews, Americans sitting side by side, listening to one another, but listening with a willingness to understand, to put aside their judgments.
Okay, Joe, from a male, macho perspective, and I say that kind of loosely, not that I'm...
Facetiously?
Yeah, not that I'm saying that you're that way.
Yes.
What's that like, moving to that place to where you can listen?
Well, first of all, I agree with what Dr. Eilleen Borris does, and I respect very much what she does. I just don't believe it'll solve the problem by itself. I think it's a start, and maybe Eilleen herself would admit that maybe all by herself and what she does is not going to be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I think people need to understand each other. I think whenever there's a conflict, it's very basic. When people have a disagreement, they can sit down and talk it out. It helps. Of course, this conflict is a little bit more deep-seated than just the one-on-one thing. It gets involved. I mean, let's really analyze this conflict between what's going on in the Middle East. It involves nationalities. It involves religions. Okay, Muslim, Jew, and Christianity.
Right.
Okay, it involves territory. It involves money. It involves power politics. It involves economic politics. It's a very complex problem. So
and there's one thing that you've missed.
Which?
On that long list, which also needs to be addressed, the state of mind of all those people.
But you see, I include all of that I've just described influences that state of mind of all those people.
That's right. And within that state of mind, and all those aspects that you talked about are very painful memories, traumas, which have perpetuated a cycle of hatred, mistrust, fear, and anger. So that all gets put into the hopper.
Yeah, but Eileen, I look at it...
So those memories aren't necessarily something that we want to sing about then.
No, but I look at it above and beyond that and see, Eileen, your discipline is showing. Your background is showing.
I'm bringing that out to show that what you're talking about and all those issues that you mentioned are crucial, and it's colored.
It colors how they think.
Everything is colored.
And I agree, and I understand it. But you see, I'm not as charitable as you are. I'm far more cynical than you are, because I believe that there are other things that color the psyche. It's not just the deep-seated memories. It's such thing as greed is involved.
That's right.
There's such thing as just ego is involved. There's such thing as just power politics, whether they're good memories or bad memories involved.
And look what's underneath greed, and look what's underneath power politics and all of that.
Yeah.
Is that fear, that anger, that distrust. If you and I were in a cooperative relationship, if we had some measure of trust, our level of greed will probably lessen somewhat, because we recognize that cooperation gets us far more than our greed.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily true. Let me phrase it differently. I may cooperate with you more and trust you as far as I need to in order to enhance my greed. You see, so I look at it's kind of like, is the glass half full or half empty? And the bottom line is, you talk about solutions. I think the only entity that's going to be able to help strongly influence what goes on over there is the United States, if it has the character, if it has the intelligence,
and if we have the guts.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And the problem is, where do we get the guts? And what influences us to do things? I notice President Bush has gone along with this $10 billion loan. Well, it's election time again, okay? I notice we're now talking about exchanging land for peace, which we could have done before the Gulf Storm Desert Storm, Gulf War. It's easy for me to say, right?
Right. And this is easy for me to say. We got to get out of here.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.